Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone, and a Happy New Year. I am Delegate Lily Chi, and I want to welcome everyone to our first work session of 2022 of the Montgomery County House Delegation's Economic Development Committee. Joining me today are my members of this committee, Delegate Resnick, Colonel Resnick, Delegate Ann Kaiser, Vice Chair, and Delegate Jared Solomon, Delegate Leslie Lopez. We are missing Delegate Ariana Kelly, who's stuck somewhere else, but we are also joined by the members of the public for one of the bills that we will spend most of the time discussing today. I want to take a moment to thank our staffers who are supporting today's work session. We have Rebecca Stryer, who is managing the whole process. Thank you very much. And also have our delegation counsel, Ben Voigt, joining us today, who may take the call. So for today's agenda, my plan is to go through the alcohol bills first. The 5 alcohol bills. We have Delegate Kaiser, who is representing District 14, where 2 of the bills are, who are sponsors of the 2 of the bills. Relating to Damascus. And we also have Montgomery County representatives, the director of, we have the director of the Intergovernmental Relations, Melanie Wenger, joining us, as well as the director of Alcoholic Services, Kathy Durbin, and Amy Saman, also from the same department. So if members have any questions relating to this bill, to these bills, feel free to ask them. Okay, any questions about the agenda, first of all, before we go to the first bill? All right, thank you. Let's start with MC 622, which is consumption only marketplace license. As you may recall, I introduced this bill 2 years ago. It was passed, but it was never implemented because of the pandemic. Essentially, it would allow for a new consumption only marketplace license to be issued to either a developer or a management company of a shopping center. So the consumers can enjoy a drink as they walk around within the confines of the shopping center or within 1,000 feet of the geographic area. Amy and Kathy are here to answer questions. Do we have any questions about this bill? All right, I'm sorry, Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't have my usual alcohol bill question, but my question is, I heard you say that this passed before, but it wasn't implemented because of the pandemic. So if it passed before, why are we considering it again?
There is a slight change in terms of the distance, and the previous version requires in the contiguous space. This one extends to 1,000 feet of the property, and I think it also has a minor tweak. Amy, you want to speak to that?
Sure.
Instead of just the developer, but also the property manager, right?
That's correct. So there are 2 just minor changes to this. The first one, as Chair Chi mentioned, is to allow the management property manager to hold the license, which rather than just have the developer, which just makes sense and excuse me, makes sense just for sake of ease. And then the other one actually has come out of the pandemic. We had initially taken the language that for the 2020 bill from the Virginia model of this. But given that the streetery model of the, the tables kind of in the parking lots and that sort of thing popped up during COVID, this is just a more clear definition of the area. Contiguous is not quite as definable versus in 1,000 feet. And this will allow them to, kind of create the streetery models that they already had and envelop it into the marketplace license.
Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Any other questions or discussions? Okay, seeing none, could I have a motion?
Move favorable.
Move favorable. Oh. Second.
Okay, all in favor, either raise your thumb or unmute yourself and say aye. Okay, raise your hand. Okay. All right. I think that is unanimous. Okay. Thank you. All right, now let's move on to MC 722, which would allow the microbreweries in the county to also obtain licenses to sell beer, wine, and liquor, right? Amy, let me know if that is
I'm
basically
sorry,
what it does.
what number, MC 7?
722.
Okay, this one is the class 7D beer, wine, and liquor. Yeah, that's correct. Sorry.
Okay.
Mhm.
Any questions or discussions? Okay. Yes, Delegate Kaiser.
I always have questions about alcohol.
Great.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ms. Saman. My question is, if we're doing this for microbreweries, should we also do it for wineries? I'm kind of misunderstanding, because a microbrewery, I assume, is brewing beer, but then you're allowing them to provide wine and liquor. So are they equal?
So
Would this
those
make
are
them equal?
this is a little, the microbrewery is a little bit different than, say, the limited winery. I think you're referencing that's not the other bill. That's more akin to the farm brewery. There's more limitations. The class 7 is, your typical microbrewery of Denison's and that sort of thing. So lining it up with one of these licenses, makes more sense. Now, that said, there is going to be another bill that does allow the same sort of, for the DBWL, will allow for those two, the class 8 farm brewery and the class 4 limited winery, to obtain a class DBW license so that they can sell each other's products. But typically, and Kathy, feel free to jump in. Typically, the brewery model holds one of these other licenses so they can, serve food and that sort of thing. They're just in a different position.
So there is a demand among the breweries to want to be able to sell.
Yeah. So with this, and they're doing it now, some of them, the class 7s hold a restaurant license, which would be like a BWL license, so that they are able to sell full food and that sort of thing. With the limited winery and the farm brewery, they, it's more about they're limited in the amount that they can even sell to the public. There's limitations. It needs to be produced from Maryland products. They have a much lower amount that they can sell. It's more of an agricultural license. So they're not going to be holding some of these other ones. But like I said, that said, they will be with the other bill. We can discuss that then, but they will be able to sell products from other wineries and breweries.
So basically, because the breweries are categorically, manufacturers, right? This bill would allow them to expand their revenue streams to be able to sell other products that they don't produce, correct?
Well, that's the other bill. I don't want to confuse these two. This one is like the microbrewery that brews about 22,000 gallons a year, and is, a bit of a larger model. We have, I think 6 or 7 in the state. They are in the county, excuse me. They are currently able to hold a restaurant license, to hold the hybrid BD license. The only one that's missing from that list is the D. And that one, offers the ability to do, excuse me, to sell beer, wine, and liquor for on-premise consumption only. So it's just simply adding this beer, wine, and liquor license to a list that the microbreweries can already hold.
Such as Massachusetts, which schools with 80%
All right.
population
Thank you.
exempt.
Any other questions? Okay. If not, anyone wants to move the bill?
Favorably.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand, please. Okay, thank you. That's unanimous, and myself. Great, thanks. All right, let's move on to MC 1222, which is a Class B, a beer, wine, liquor license referendum. This bill would allow the voters in District 14 to decide if they want the sale of a beer, wine, liquor 7 days a week, including Sundays. Delegate Kaiser, is that correct?
Not for the residents of District 14, but the residents of just election District 12, the 5
Okay, that's right.
precincts
Okay.
up in Damascus.
Okay,
And as people may not know, we repealed prohibition in Damascus 10 years ago. It had been the second or third legislative attempt over the years. It passed fairly overwhelmingly. And I think I said this at the hearing, that at the time they said, oh, you're going to make changes immediately, and we'll be like the rest of the county, and we like it the way it is, and so forth. So we definitely held off time, and now here we are more than 10 years later. I think it was 2012 we did this, and Amy can correct me. And now it's a chance to expand it to wine and liquor as well. So again, it would go to referendum for just the residents. Damascus is not a town, but the residents of the election District 12.
okay, election District 12. Okay. Any questions for Delegate Kaiser? Okay, if not, who would like to move the bill?
I'll move the
All
bill.
right,
favorably.
okay. Delegate
I'll give it a
Kaiser moved
second.
and Delegate Lopez second. Okay, all in favor, raise your hand. All right, that is again unanimous. Thank you very much. Next is MC 2122. That is a bill that will allow Damascus farm breweries and certain wineries to sell beer and wine for both on and off premise consumption. Do we have any questions for Delegate Kaiser? Or for county representatives? Okay, if not, can I have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Second.
All right. Okay, all in favor, raise your hand. Delegate Kaiser, is your hand up? I assume. Bill sponsor. Great, all right.
Sorry
is
about that.
great.
Which one were we voting on? I had to step
Your
out.
your bill,
2112?
on the farm brewers, yes, 2112, 22.
Yes, we have a lot of good farm breweries in our district, and this is just expanding it. So
Great.
not a big explanation. Miss Saman can probably help me with.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, that was again unanimous. The last alcohol bill is MC 2322. It would allow the Cross Vines project, which is in Poolsville in my district, which is a wine crushing and production facility, an economic development project, to have a production license and a retail license, so it can actually do what it was set up to do. Amy, do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. So, like Delgatti has said, the existing license, a Class beer, wine, and liquor license, Clubhouse Lodge, is held by the Revenue Authority. It was created for the Revenue Authority for the golf courses to be able to serve beer, wine, and liquor. So that is the license that the Revenue Authority currently holds. This would then allow them to attain the Class 4 limited winery license and the Class Class 7 microbrewery license, as Delgatti has said, so that they can actually produce the wine and then be able to sell it on premise and utilize the wine crushing facility. In addition, the executive director of the Revenue Authority has indicated that he may be interested in partnering with some of the local cideries. So that cider is considered brew. So that is why it necessitates getting a microbrewery license as well. So that's why that one is included in this bill. My understanding is that the chief inspector from the Alcohol Tobacco Commission was actually viewing the facility, the wine crushing facility, and suggested utilizing this method in order for the Revenue Authority to be able to open their wine crushing facility. So this suggestion actually did come from the state in order to do it this way, to obtain the 2 manufacturing licenses with the license that they're currently holding.
Okay, thank you for the elaboration. Any other questions? If not, anyone wants to move the bill?
Favorably.
Move the bill.
Second,
All right, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. All right, unanimous. That concludes our voting on the alcohol bills today. And then we are going to transition. And thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Kathy, for joining us. Okay,
Thank you.
we're going to transition to our discussion of MC 822 regarding establishing business improvement districts in Montgomery County. I want to first take a moment to acknowledge the public and the colleagues that are joining us today. We have, of course, the bill sponsor, Delegate Lori Charkoudian here, representing the sponsoring team, District 20. We also have Councilmember Andrew Friesen. We have also reached out to Councilmember Will Jawando, who had spoken at the hearing last time on December 15th. And we have several representatives representing different potential or working groups of future bids. The Friendship Heights Alliance, Rich Bradley. I was given a name, Jada Donahoe. Is that? Okay, thank you. And we have Pike District representatives, Amy, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Amy Ginsburg and Matt Herman. I think, is there another representative from the Pike District? Okay. We also have Steve Silverman from Silver Spring Bid, and we have Greater Bethesda Chamber of Commerce representatives, Ashley Bagwell and Andy Shulman, right? Have I mentioned everybody? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much for taking the time. Oh, let me see. Yes. Oh, Jonathan Chambers, can you tell me who you represent?
Good morning. I represent Friends of Whiteflint.
Okay. All right. Friends of Whiteflint. Thank you. With Amy, right? Okay. Thank you all for taking the time to join us and help us understand what this bill does and its impact on your work or what you're trying to do. Okay. First, I want to kind of refresh everyone's memory because it's been a few weeks since the public hearing about this bill. This bill simply seeks to amend the current enabling law governing business improvement districts, also known as BIDs, to make it more, according to the bill sponsor's language, more democratic, right? By changing the requirements in bid formation, as well as the board structure and member elections. For context, a bid is a self-taxing. We're texting too much. I keep using texting, but self-taxing district to improve the commercial vitality and attractiveness of that specific area. Bid has to be approved by local governments, and 100% of the tax collected, additional tax collected from that geographic area will be returned by the local government to the governing board, usually is a nonprofit, to fund certain projects to improve that community. The existing law, which is actually a Montgomery County local law passed in 2017, lowered the state's threshold from 80% to 51%, a simple majority. And also it says, a board could have 5 to 9 members. So this bill seeks to seeks to raise the threshold from 51% to 65% in order to form a bid of commercial property owners and property interests. It also does several things to the board. First, it expands the board from 9 to 15 members. It also creates a new class of board members, which is the commercial tenants. And finally, it stipulates that each group of board members would elect its own members. So commercial tenants would elect commercial tenants and property owners would elect property owners. Okay, so I have the bill sponsor here. If I missed anything in summarizing, Delegate Charkoudian, would you like to add to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's good. I would clarify 2 things, and then I just want to apologize. I'm not sure that I understood. Well, let me just do the clarification first. So it actually creates a new class of membership And so instead of creating it's a new class of board members, but also a new class of membership. And that distinction is important because the class of membership allows then commercial tenants to elect their own representatives and property owners to elect their own representatives, as opposed to the structure now, which you may hear about, which is that property owners are the members in state law. And so therefore property member owners are the only ones who can elect board members. They can then choose whether they want commercial tenants on there, which commercial tenants they want, and so on. But it's the class of membership that we're creating that really creates that democratic process. And I can talk more about the specifics of the bill as we go through. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Okay. I want to open the floor to our members to ask questions, but before I do that, I want to turn over. I had a chat with my Vice Chair, Delegate Jared Solomon, who also has some questions. So I'm going to turn to him first. Okay.
I appreciate that, Chair Chi. It's good to see everybody. Delegate Charkoudian, thank you for bringing this bill forward. I guess a primary focus that I wanted, I think, as Delegate Charkoudian mentioned, was really, the thing that struck me was making sure that we do have involvement from commercial tenants. And I know, obviously each bid is slightly different. The situation in Silver Spring is different than, what potentially could be going on in Friendship Heights, what could be going on in White Flint. But I guess, having looked at we obviously always hear about DC, and particularly in Friendship Heights, the DC bid, the DC process will govern half of it, right? The Friendship Heights issue is going to be split between two jurisdictions. So I was looking at the DC legislation, and I see that DC does include commercial tenants as members of the bid. I was just curious if somebody could shed some light on the DC process. I'm not an expert in it, I reviewed it, but would be curious to hear from the Friendship Heights folks in particular, as it's a chunk of my district, how the DC process works in reality with the commercial tenants.
Maybe I could call upon Mr. Rich Bradley, who is a deep knowledge expert on DC bids. He was the head of the DC downtown bid, right? Downtown DC bid.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, delegates, for the chance to visit with you about this important matter. Yes, in terms of the DC legislation, quite frankly, the enabling legislation requires 50% of the property owners, 50% of the value of the property owners, and 25% of the property owners to agree to be assessed. When it comes to prescribing classes of tenants, it doesn't really get into that in any great detail. It basically requires, however, that 50% of the board members, whatever the size board gets created, and the bids are guided also by the nonprofit law in the district. So there's another piece of legislation that guides them. But most bids actually have boards that are closer to 30 or 40 people, in some cases quite large. And commercial tenants are very much included, as are what I would say, not only the tenants in the sense of commercial office tenants, but store owners and what have you. In downtown Washington, for example, we had a person who owned a coffee shop, but we also had the head of Macy's. You actually want to be as inclusive as possible rather than exclusive, because the idea of a bid isn't just to provide service, it's to engage everybody in a collective effort to make it better. So I don't know if that helps you at all, but it turns out that the legislation is essentially enabling because it wants to be more inclusive rather than exclusive, to ensure that you have the widest participation. In our case, I should add, we had members of the downtown congregation, as well as homeless serving people on our board.
Okay, okay, all right. I will save my question for later. I see Steve Silverman wants to chime in here. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Let me just pick up on what Rich said, Delegate Solomon and others. So the DC law is essentially enabling legislation. It says a couple of things specifically. It says that commercial tenants, business tenants, are part of the bid, they're members, but it leaves to the articles of incorporation of the bid to decide the voting mechanism. So some of the bids in DC have the ability of commercial tenants to vote. They get a vote, but the articles of incorporation set up what they want to do. And as a practical matter, I'll defer to Rich, but as a practical matter with the DC bids that we talked to in crafting the Silver Spring bid, they all have commercial tenants, nonprofits, and others on the board, but the real voting power for selecting those members is via the Articles of Incorporation, which in DC primarily are assessed value, so that the large property owners basically end up selecting the entire board. The second thing is the DC law is very clear that not less than a majority of all board members shall represent owners, property owners. So when the council, and we worked with the county council, we all agreed to a threshold of a third of the 9-member board to be commercial tenants. But at the end of the day, they are elected not within their own class. They are elected by the property owners of the bid.
Okay.
So I hope
Thank
that
you.
clarifies.
Yes, thank you. I want to call upon Delegate Resnick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Delegate Charkoudian about the structure of the bill. I am in complete agreement with you that we need to find a way for business owners, small business owners, commercial tenants, and others to be members of the decision-making board. My concern deals with the initial vote. 65% for both property owners and commercial tenants. We can decide on a number if we need to decide, to talk about the number. My concern is the idea of the commercial tenants participating as a deciding factor as to whether or not to move the bid forward. I don't think commercial tenants are particularly well defined. As you know, the failure rate for small businesses, even under the best of circumstances, is very high in the first year. What you see, the sort of the universe of commercial tenants at the beginning of the bid process may be a very different group of people than the universe of commercial tenants when the actual vote takes place. So how do we define that? How do we also define small businesses and commercial tenants? Are we talking about people who just have a lease within a property building, or are we talking about other small businesses, S corps, sole proprietorships? If we are talking about small businesses with a lease, one popular method for small businesses is to get a piece of a lease within, say, for example, a model like Regis might have. So is it Regis that gets the vote as the commercial tenant, or is it the 50 subleases to Regis as small businesses that get the commercial to vote to under the bid? So I think there is a difficulty in defining this universe and then finding 65% of them to agree to the bid. I think what we're doing is creating a situation where it is virtually impossible for ever to move forward. So I want to get your thoughts on that.
Thank
And
you.
I'm mute because my dog is being obnoxious.
Thank you. Madam Chair, can I
Sure,
answer the
please.
question? Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. And thanks for the question, Delegate Resnick. So I think what's really important, and I'm not trying to make it impossible to move forward with a bid. I think there's advantages and disadvantages to bids as an economic development model. And I think, that's not the conversation I'm trying to have. But the kind of the broader goal, as has been said, is if we are going to have bids, it is crucial because of our commitment in the state and in the county to racial equity, that we build the bids in a way that are democratic and ensure inclusion and equity in both the creation and the governance of the bid. So I just want to be clear, I'm not trying to set a standard that is impossible. So having said that, I think this is where this question about how much do we do at the state versus the local level, and some of what Mr. Silverman was saying a moment ago, that this is enabling legislation. And I've sort of seen, I've taken a look at some different models, New York State, I've looked at some of the DC ones, I've looked at DC defines the commercial tenant as members, which Maryland does not right now. Right now, our bid does not define commercial tenants as members, and then leaves some of the details to the locals. My bid kind of adds additional democratic processes, leaves some details to the locals. So I'm really open to this question about if we want to put into state law more details about, this is how we define commercial tenants, this is how we define who has to sign on, this is how we define who gets a vote, or I'm fine with that being decided at the local level. within each individual sort of process, either within the creation of an individual bid, or if the county were interested in defining it sort of for all bids in the county. So my primary goal is like where we were was the actual state legislation was preventing some of the creative solutions from happening at the local level. I was trying to correct that, and at the same time enhance and encourage the local process to be more democratic. So all that to say, like, I'm open to this conversation about how we do that definition. And if you think it belongs in state law, we could talk about putting it in state law. I've talked a little bit to Councilmember Friedson about certain types of commercial tenants. If you're in a space with, different kinds of commercial. So I'm open to all of that. I think that, and so we could work out those details, once there's agreement on these broader concepts, I think.
I'm going to call upon Councilmember Friesen later to answer questions, but let me turn to my committee member, Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone on this complex legislation. And thank you, Delegate Charkoudian, who I emailed yesterday with some questions and got back to me very quickly. So I appreciate that. Mr. Silverman, I do have a question about something you said, just one particular piece of it. If I understood you correctly, that leaving it to the, it sounds like, I don't remember if you said the letters of incorporation or the bylaws or whichever, that determines how many tenants get to have voting power. It sounds like it's also possible that they could have none. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, it's DC law is basically open. It doesn't specify. It just leaves to the articles of incorporation how many votes somebody gets. So in DC, I'll defer again to Rich, but several of the bids that we had talked to, yes, they do allow commercial tenants to have a vote on the election of the board, but their vote is, quite frankly, a vote, as opposed to the larger property owners who, in effect.
And Madam Chair, if I could ask a follow-up.
Sure.
Do either of you, Mr. Silverman or Mr. Bradley, fundamental, or do you know how, when tenants have a single vote, there are presumably sometimes just a few tenants and sometimes tens and tens of tenants. How is it that they get one vote? How are they supposed to come together to make that vote?
I'm happy to answer that. And I just want to make one clarification to Steve's comments. Again, the legislation requires in the district that a board must be at least 51% made up of property owners. Once the board is formed, which can include other people, the nominating committee actually is drawn from the full board. So in essence, how to say, the legislation makes clear that the major property owners have significant influence, but they're not the only influence. And so in terms of election to the board, others get engaged with that. So just as a technical modification. As a matter of course, at least in our bid, when there's the annual meeting each year, a property owner gets one vote for every 2,000 square foot they own, and someone gets a vote for every 2,000 square feet they lease. So it's actually divided. The property owners and the tenants get the same vote at the annual meeting, at which point in time they vote for the new board of directors. That's the primary vehicle in which they get the vote. We don't do a lot of voting usually the rest of the time because most of the issues we're dealing with are intended, and I want to qualify something here. This is called a business improvement district. It's not a property owner improvement district. It's not a retail improvement district. It's a business improvement district. And these grew out of years ago when downtowns were being essentially eviscerated by shopping centers, the creation of some kind of commercial association of businesses to address these problems. And they first went to voluntary contribution and discovered there were free riders, and that didn't work. So they looked for some mechanism like the shopping center has. The shopping centers have a common area maintenance charge.
Sir,
Yeah.
I just, point of order, Madam Chair. My question was only about how they decide the votes of the tenants. It sounds, Mr.
Okay.
Bradley, this might be interesting information, but I really just wanted to know that piece of the puzzle.
That's fine. I was just trying to give context for it.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing,
Steve?
Madam Chair, that's really important
Very
about
quick.
the discussion about businesses? Sure. There's no list of businesses that's available. It doesn't exist. there you can get some information out of SDAT. You can get some different pieces together, but the concern that we would have in Silver Spring, because my understanding is the sponsor plans on making this retroactive.
Okay,
Is
so
that we
noted.
there's no existing business list anywhere that is available, and I've checked this with the county executive's office. And I ran DED. We had the same problem. Doesn't
Okay,
exist.
thank you. I want to ask Councilmember Friesen. First of all, I have a question for you, which is, I understand that council had a robust discussion on this as well, but you did not really take a final vote, right? And so, to Delegate Charkoudian's point about the definition of commercial tenant, can you elaborate on that in terms of the county's enabling legislation?
Sure. Well, I can only speak here for myself because the council didn't take a position, so I can't. But I'll speak for myself and just I acknowledge that the council has had significant conversations. I also just wanted to thank Delegate Charkoudian, who I have spoken with at length about these issues. Appreciate your willingness to engage and try to work through some of these issues. My biggest focus throughout the council discussions, which I just think would be helpful for these discussions, is to make sure that any solution and resolution to some of the issues that have been raised in downtown Silver Spring, which the District 20 delegation has been focused on, understandably and importantly, does not have an unintended consequence on some of the other bid efforts that are happening elsewhere in the county. And so that's why you have the Friendship Heights representation here, which is cross-jurisdictional and has unique challenges. There's significant momentum on those efforts. DC is moving forward with those efforts, already investing money into those efforts. The county executive has committed money into those efforts. I am working directly with the county executive and his office on those efforts. There's real momentum there, and I see Mr. Donahoe has his hand up, and he's been at the center of many of those efforts. And that is a community that's quite different. Speaking to your question, Madam Chair, of the difference between the types of tenants. The tenants in Friendship Heights, a large number of them, including several of my doctors that I go to, are doctors' offices and other medical services that are on the second, third, fourth, fifth, ninth, 10th floor of an office building. That is quite different in terms of the type of business and the clean and safe functions and the walkability and the streetscape type issues of a storefront retail business, which tends to be the focus in many urban areas and a lot of the efforts that a bid takes place. And so it's just important that as we do that, number one, when it relates to Friendship Heights, that it be flexible enough to work in tangent with the DC law in order to actually get something done there that will lift up that community. There's overwhelming support from property owners, residents, community associations, in order to actually see something happen in Friendship Heights that isn't just luxury retail, but actually community serving, retail and businesses, which, is a shared goal, I believe, of everybody, including several of the municipal governments around there who have engaged in this. And then when it comes to the Pike District, the county has engaged Andy Schulman and his colleagues on formal committees for the past decade or longer in order to make recommendations and in order to move forward for how we're going to re-envision what it is to have what had been a suburban office retail strip center environment when I grew up, and many here grew up, to the type of livable, walkable, accessible community that we all desperately want, that is incumbent not just on economic development, but on environmental sustainability and access through equity with good transportation infrastructure. So my focus, has been throughout this process, as the council has taken this up, to really focus on making sure that there are really three aspects of bids in Maryland. There's the enabling legislation at the state level, which we're here to talk about today. There's the establishment of the bid, which happens at the county council level. And then there's the execution of the articles of incorporation, which is really at the organizational level. We've talked about all three of them today. And my only big focus here is to make sure that we don't recreate some of the challenges that Delegate Charkoudian and the District 20 team is trying to address to fix some of the rigidity that many didn't like, including several of my colleagues, didn't like, that we couldn't do at the county council level, but doesn't have a new level of rigidity that makes it very hard for us to move these forward, and really does recognize the uniqueness, as has been talked about, of all the various communities where some of these current efforts are happening, and perhaps future efforts, because there have been conversations now in Wheaton and in other parts of the county of a real interest in moving efforts like this forward. And we want to make sure that we're not preventing them before those efforts have a chance to actually go underway. So I hope that answers your question. I hope it wasn't too out of order, giving a little bit more color commentary, and happy to answer any other specific questions as well. Thanks for the opportunity.
I very much appreciate your perspective. I know you're not here representing full council, but I understand you're personally very invested in this subject. And having worked in DC economic development before I came to Montgomery County, I know the competitive landscape, and the whole concept of having bids is to inject more commercial vitality. So we want to be enabling without holding back our competitiveness, but we also want to be inclusive and have this opportunity to do it right. So that's always a balance. That's why we want to hear the council's perspectives. In terms of the protocol of this work session, Mr. Donahoe, I just want to make sure that you actually can respond as a clarifying point to one of the questions the members have, because I cannot call on you to ask questions. Do you have a point to make quickly about any of the discussions, the questions our members have raised?
Yes, and thank you, Delegate Chi. I just wanted to point out that, particularly with regard to the issues surrounding formation of a new bid, ourselves and other property owners, we're also a business owner in Friendship Heights, myself and other property owners didn't even start talking about the idea of a business improvement district until we saw those changes 5 or 6 years ago on the state level for the formation of bids in Montgomery County. And that was, immensely cheering to us, because that 51% of property owners by value and by number aligned very closely with the requirements in DC. And that's what kind of gave us the spur, the changes that you all and your predecessors made to actually go forward with beginning a conversation about forming a bid. It's because we have to form essentially 2 separate bids side by side across Western Avenue. Friendship Heights as a business district is split about 55-45 on either side of Western Avenue. It's intensely important to us that the laws look as similar as possible on either side of that border, or we're just not going to be able to move forward in a way where the 2 parts are treated equally and similarly.
Thank you.
We're very pleased by the current legislation. We look forward to working with you on how business owners can be represented on the bid.
Thank you. Delegate Solomon.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I guess this is a question, sort of a 2-parter, both for Delegate Charkoudian and then for Mr. Donahoe and Mr. Bradley. Again, appreciate you being here to provide sort of the DC perspective. So I wanted to get back to that point about, I understand, as Delegate Resnick had said, the commercial tenant universe does change, right? I mean, and, I've had some conversations with folks that obviously tenant relationships look very different depending on who you're talking to. But the DC application does require a list of names and addresses of all the commercial tenants within the bid area. It does say to an extent reasonably ascertainable, which I think obviously is probably open to some interpretation. And so, I guess to Delegate Charkoudian, I'd be curious, in your research, what have you found that looks like in DC? What does that look like in some of the other jurisdictions that you studied? And then to Mr. Donahoe and Mr. Bradley, what does that look like on the practical level from your experience in DC? And what does that look like in the conversations that you've had on the DC side of Friendship Heights? How do you catalog that? I mean, do you work with your property owners to get a list of who they're renting to? How do you put that together in as ascertainable a way as possible, reasonably ascertainable based on the DC law?
Delegate Charkoudian, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. I think, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Solomon. I think probably the folks who have actually gotten the list together, I think the important thing to your point, Delegate Solomon, is that it's doable, and we sort of see the process in DC. And then I think I mentioned the New York City bids all have the roles for commercial tenants, also roles for residential and other sort of types of membership. So I think my takeaway, although I'm interested in hearing how it's done, my takeaway is that it's possible, and we're all smart people and we can figure out an answer to it if we have the will and believe that the voices of commercial tenants are important in this. And that is really what I'm hearing from everybody, is because it is a business improvement district. Those voices are important. And so, as I said earlier, I'm open to thinking about the ways to do that. But I also welcome hearing from the folks in DC, sort of how they get that list, because it is part of that application.
Thank you. Delegate Resnick.
Thank you, and I
Madam Chair,
appreciate the second bite. I want to throw something out, and because I am concerned that we are going to spend a couple of weeks going back and forth trying to find details, and at the end of the day not end up happy with whatever we get. So I want to throw this out, and I think it's interesting that Mr. Donahoe said what he said, because it's kind of the same thinking that I was having. If the DC model is really being held up here by both sides as something that is workable, and that this particular bill is based on, and the fact that we are going to have cross-border potential, more than Friendship Heights, we may have more, in other areas, cross-border bids. And for next week, maybe if Ben can help us research this, is there anything preventing us from simply adopting the DC model, anything in state or county law, preventing us from simply adopting the DC model, equalizing the two jurisdictions in the way that bids are done, and moving forward in that way? And that's what I'd like to see us figure out. There might be some quirk in state or local law that prevents us from doing that. We may have to, wordsmith it a little bit to try and make it fit, because laws are what they are, and we may not simply be able to take that whole cloth and drop it into statute. But that's what I'd like to figure out for next week, if that's possible. I'd like to throw it out to both the sponsor and the other folks as to whether or not that is a viable solution to move forward, rather than dealing with defining commercial tenants, figuring out a percentage that is hard and fast in state law that we may not be able to change and may hurt us moving forward.
Thank you for the proposal. Yes, Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. I want to tag on to what Delegate Resnick said, but from a slightly different perspective, and knowing that this is the bill that's going to take us some period of time, I would like a better understanding of the details of the DC law. I'd like a better understanding of the real problem we're addressing. And also, it seems like there potentially needs to be flexibility for the different bids within our own county. And how do we create that flexibility, and where do we, what aspects should be flexible, and who does that, who gets to have that decision making in the end? So that's something else I'd love to see by the next time we talk about this.
Thank you. And that's another excellent point, which is how do we make it enabling and allow enough flexibility for different bids to structure themselves. Okay, Delegate Solomon, is your hand up?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I was just curious. I didn't get a chance to get Mr. Bradley and Mr. Donahoe's response. I was just curious how they were doing it in DC. And Mr. Bradley, if you could talk about sort of your experience from your work in the DC bids, putting those lists together, doing the outreach to the commercial tenants. Just be curious to hear how that went. It sounded like you had a pretty equitable process in the bids that you were involved in.
In terms of identifying the tenants, in terms of what the act requires, what we did is we went to the property owners and asked them for a list of their tenants. In general, they gave it to us. It turns out that there aren't hundreds and hundreds of property owners. It's usually a limited number, so that's not a difficult task. We've also at times used records from the district in terms of business licenses. It's another way. If we can get those by zip code or area code, that gives us some sense of that. But we try to put those two together to comply with the act.
Thank you. And have you, I imagine both you and Mr. Donahoe have engaged the commercial tenants on the Friendship Heights piece as well? Yeah. or if that's in the works.
Yes, Chad can talk about this. They're actually members of our board already. We've actually formed an association right now. It's a nonprofit association that crosses the boundary, and they are members. Chevy Chase Land is a member. Jad has property there. So we've begun that already and begun to engage with both sides, treat it as a single market area.
Great. That's what I read. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there other questions from members? These are several great points that have been raised that we can follow up on. I have a question for Councilmember Friesen. Do you know when the council might take a position on this?
That I'm not sure, but I can circle back with you, Madam Chair. I think that some of the questions that you've raised here are some of the, questions that we had. They're still evolving conversations about some of the individual issues related to this. Some of the same questions and comments that have been made here about additional information are similar ones that have been part of the council discussion as well.
Okay. I have a question for the Pike District, Matt Herman and Amy Ginsberg, right? What is your timeline in looking to establish the bid?
Delegate Chi, thanks for that question. And I'll let Andy Schulman chime in if I miss anything here. But we are looking to do something that's very similar to what you see in Friendship Heights, which is establishing a nonprofit entity that would be very diverse and consist of many different stakeholders that would be sort of an interim solution until such time as a bid is viable and ready to go. And I think that was one of the big concerns with folks that have been involved with the Pike District is that even at 51%, we are still not ready for a bid. And so any changes that have been proposed here really concern us because it's going to make it even more difficult. And even with this lower threshold, we're just not there right yet. So we're kind of taking the model of doing this hybrid, I think the best way to describe it is a public-private partnership that would be a nonprofit partnering with the county. And that would eventually transition into a bid in the next couple of years, assuming the conditions are there to warrant a bid. If the conditions are not there to warrant a bid, I would leave with you that there's bigger problems there for the White Flint District. So that's kind of the timeline that we're operating under. We're probably more in the 5+ year mark to where we think a bid would be ready.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Andy Schulman.
Thank you, Delegate Chi. I just wanted to clarify that I think, the 2017 legislation, which was enabling legislation, allowed for flexibility for each bid applicant. And I just wanted to make it clear that if a bid isn't serving its purposes, there is a check and balance in that existing 2017 legislation. Every 3 years, a bid has to be recertified by the county council. So if you have a situation where the commercial tenants are unhappy and they don't believe that their investment in a bid is getting what they believe they should get out of it, they can make that known to the county council. If the property owners aren't happy, if they're just not doing the job, they're not accomplishing their goals, it's the county council's responsibility, according to the 2017 legislation, to address the issues or to force the bid to address the issues in order to be recertified for another 3 years. So there is a process if the bid isn't working under the current legislation. And I just wanted to everybody to understand that.
We understand. Thank you. Thank you for the clarifying point. Are there any other questions from the members of this committee or any comments? I know this is a complex issue, and I want to make sure that we have heard of all perspectives and have enough time to look into some details. Looks like Delegate Charkoudian wants to make a point.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you're open to comments, the one thing I wanted to say is while we don't have an answer yet on the specific legislation from the county council received an email from the District 20 team over the summer, which did list pretty specifically what we intended to do with the legislation, increasing to 15 members, adding membership for commercial tenants, increasing the threshold, and increasing notification. That was sort of the bullet list that we sent. And they did vote at that time that they supported all of that in principle, recognizing that they would want to see the legislation. So I know that the timing of when we have specifics and when they're ready to speak to this specific piece, but I did want to point out that to the extent that the county council has taken a position, it was supportive of those as bullet points.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Friesen, do you have a response to Delegate
Yeah,
Charkoudian?
just a slight point of clarification. I'm not sure that the county council took a position on the specific aspects of what the District 20 delegation had sent in the letter of what it intended to do in the legislation. The resolution was specifically omitting of specific aspects that would be in the bill, but supported broadly of state legislation that would address some of the issues specifically related to the rigidity, where we, perhaps wanted to make some changes, including like the board composition, and increasing the board composition, but weren't able to based on the state legislation. So it's not a total disagreement with Delegate Charkoudian's clarification, just slightly nuanced difference. I don't think that the council took a formal position on the individual aspects as contemplated and ultimately proposed, but on the broad idea of state legislation that would provide greater flexibility and address some of the issues that were raised during the bid legislative process. So I just wanted to clarify that one point.
Thank you. We are at 11 o'clock. I don't want to extend the time. Everyone is super busy, but I think for this complex issue in the bill, we will need another work session and a voting session to finish the process. So as Delegate Resnick proposed and Delegate Kaiser kind of also indicated, we need to collect more detailed information about how the DC law currently is working and how we could possibly be aligned more regionally in that spirit. I will ask Rebecca to schedule another meeting in the next, hopefully, couple of weeks. And we'll welcome all of you to join us again as we evaluate and hopefully voted either way. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for your time and for your insights. This has been hugely helpful. Thank you, Delegate Charkoudian, for sponsoring and bringing this for our consideration, and all of you for your perspectives. And with that,